of Dr. Juliette Engel. This story can't be done in 30 minutes, 3 hours. I maybe can get it done in 30 minutes, 30 hours, or 3 days or 30 days. That's like nonstop because it's that fascinating. I'm almost done her book, Sparky. I was reading on the plane, just cramming it as I go, flying home. But it's a hard read. Not a hard read because she's not a good writer, because she's insanely good. I read it, and one of the things that I saw is when I'm an author, first time, and I read other people's books that are really, really good, and I start questioning my level of writing, and it's nothing like hers. She's off the chart. But you have to put it down because it's hard, because you're reading about her life and how the federal government basically just destroyed her as a young child into her young teenage, or end of her teenage years. So I have a biography, but I just think that this is the best way to start, because I really went back and forth. How am I going to interview this lady properly? Because the story's just, let's just get into it, okay? Because it's that, I could spend hours just doing an introductory, but I want to read off the back of her book, Sparky, Surviving Sex Magic, okay? And then I want to turn it over to her, because I want her to talk about the beginnings, because it's unbelievable. And this is not sci-fi. This isn't the Twilight Zone. This is United States of America. This is indisputable. This has already been fact-checked 1 million times over. It's real. And it's that shocking. Dr. Juliette M. Engel, radiologist turned activist, a former University of Washington assistant professor in the Department of Radiology, drastically changed the course of her life in 1990. She sold a successful diagnostic ultrasound practice in Bellevue, Washington, to establish the MiraMed Institute, a nonprofit that sought to improve, and I'm going to butcher this word, I'm going to spell it OBSTETRIC, care in Russia, and now focuses on advancing human rights for women and children. She went on to co-found 2 Russian non-governmental organizations to further her goal of preventing the trafficking and abuse of vulnerable children. The Angel Coalition and Women and Children First. In 2013, she was awarded the University of Washington Medical School Humanitarian Award. Oh, Logan, can you please bring in the doctor? Hello, ma'am. Thank you for joining us today. And I don't know how people interview you. I'll be very honest, because it's like volumes. And I don't think we could go into your life and say, okay, tell me about your life, doctor. It's almost as if you have to go segments in your life. And I want the audience, can you just spend some time, and I don't want you rushed, spend some time talking about the beginning of your life, the beginning of how you wrote your book, Sparky, so our audience can understand your perspective, where you're coming from, because I've never heard of this before. Like, I just started to get into the MKUltra and the Operation Paperclip recently, right? You lived it. You were submerged in it. Can you start from the beginning? Because it's fascinating. And it's true. And that's what scares me.
Yeah, it's true. And do you hear me all right?
I do. Yes, ma'am. I hear you clearly.
I'm always worried about my audio. My story, first of all, by the time I was 17 and had escaped MKUltra and gone to college, gotten myself into the University of Washington, and was completely restarting my life, I forgot everything. It's how you survive that kind of trauma, and it's how in MKUltra they split you into multiple personalities, multiple identities, and if you asked me, I'd say I have about 150 of them by the time I was done. and that sort of presents a kind of a unique set of problems. But so I didn't remember anything about my childhood, and it didn't start coming back to me until I was in my early 30s, and my daughter was born, and I was looking at this little perfect, pure little copy of myself, and thinking, what do I do with this? You know, how do I be a mother? And that's when I started to remember just awful things, just unbelievably horrific things, and not knowing where they were coming from. And I guess this is it's a pretty common pattern with MKUltra victims. They start remembering these things, and they think that they're going mad, and that these evil thoughts and the things that are actually memories of violence are things that they will do. But if they're controlled enough to have forgotten everything, then they're buried deeply, and they're probably the most controlled people on earth, as opposed to others who are still under the influence. But that's another set. So I began to remember and wanted to tell my story. So I began digging into the past, and it was just so overwhelming to, the reason I did it was, one, to create a narrative that I could refer to myself and try to start figuring this out. Remember, no one else was writing about MKUltra, and my own family would threaten me. I mean, they threatened me, and they did carry out threats. So it wasn't they weren't idle threats. And the last time I saw my father, he said to me, I told him that I was having these visions, these nightmares, and I was terrified I was going to hurt my child. And so I was going to go to a psychiatrist. And he looked at me and said, if you go to a psychiatrist, you will never see your mother and me again. And I said, if I don't go to a psychiatrist, I'm going to kill myself. And he said to me, that's your choice. And I wrote him off.
Wow.
I'd written him off before, but I didn't remember that. But I wrote him off again at that moment, went to a psychiatrist who told me I was all kinds of hyperachiever. And this is someone I'd worked with as a medical student, so he knew me very well. He didn't know anything about my past, but I mean, he knew me as a professional. And he told me I was all kinds of, didn't have a good sense of boundaries, lacked limits, was always overdoing, couldn't argue with that. But he said, you're not crazy. And that saved my life, because if he'd said, you're nuts just like your mother, I would have killed myself, because I thought I was that big a threat to my child. And as I slowly unwound things, he didn't understand what was going on, because he couldn't relate it to anything. It really wasn't until Kathy O'Brien came out and exposed MKUltra that there was any reference at all. But we did break down the trauma into narrative.
Can I interrupt you for a second? And can you
Sure.
pause for a second and tell our audience that maybe just hearing this for the first time, because I was one of those guys that just heard about this, a year ago. And I was at first MKUltra. I was like, oh God, here goes another crazy conspiracy theorist. And then I started listening to him like, oh no, this is proven. Operation Paper. Oh my God, it's tied. Can you give us a brief overview of what you're talking about of MKUltra, and then how you were one of the first people put into that psyop, if you will?
Yeah, it was a CIA operation, and it came right out of the OSS. And my family were all my uncles, grandfather, great grandfather. They were all in the OSS. They were German speakers. They'd been at Nuremberg, and they had facilitated bringing the Nazis that everybody thought were executed in Germany to the United States. Between the five of them, they brought over 1,500 German Nazis to the United States and helped them relocate, get new identities, start working in institutes. And all of them had these lavish. I didn't know my uncles well, but whenever you went to one of their houses, they would show off their lavish portraits, artwork, gifts from, and they were right up front with it. The Nazis gave us this, because they were so grateful. Theoretically, they were so grateful because they were hung. No, they were so grateful because they were courted, brought to the United States, given high-paying jobs, and have moved into, our culture. And interestingly, the records of who is who, the identities. There are several reports on that by Christopher Story from World Reports, and he gives credible sources that all these records were kept at the Murtaugh Building, which was the Oklahoma City bombers' target, and all of the records. Yeah, apparently the records were destroyed in a big explosion, so no one can trace down whose descendants are actually descendants of Hitler's
I did not
Nazis.
know that. Now, you said 1,500 Nazis were brought over by our government. Why did our government
by my family? The government.
By your family?
The government brought over how many tens of thousands? I don't know. But,
why would our government bring in Nazi scientists into America?
Well, they were highly trained. They were, like Werner von Braun, and so my exposure was mostly the psychological experiments.
Right.
They were very advanced, not only in other sciences, but also in mind control. And the MK in MKUltra actually stands for Mein Kampf. And this is, that was Hitler's book, My Struggle. And in the latter part of it, he does talk about how to control the masses and how important it is to control the masses. And we were to be, so this high-level CIA people, high-level military people, put their kids in the program. So they would take the oldest child, or the child that had the most potential for what they call PSI, which is like a psychological ESP, I guess you would call it. But these kids, myself included, they started bringing him into the program when it was founded in 1953. And you can look it up. You can look up Sidney Gottlieb. So the program was started by the very evil Dulles brothers, John Foster Dulles and Alan Dulles. It was signed into existence, and they appointed Sidney Gottlieb as the head of it. And you can look up, he's got a long and storied career in the CIA. You can look all this up on Wikipedia, among other more credible sources, but this is not hidden. And the connection to Project Paperclip is hidden. And of course, the identities are like Epstein's list. They don't want anybody to know. Is that Sidney Gottlieb?
Yeah.
Yeah. So people like Joseph Mengele was probably like one of the programmers probably that I met, because I came in 1955. I didn't come in. I was sold by my father in a big show where he made sure I saw the money changing hands, and the man he sold me to raped me in front of my father, and I was screaming, and my father looked at me and said, "Well, this is what I raised you for." And at that moment, I cut him out and realized I was never going to get any help from him. So then 30 years later, when he's telling me, "Well, if you want to kill yourself, go ahead." There was a link there.
Why would you? What was the connection of your father with this MKUltra that he would sell you to them?
He was terrified of them. Now, the easiest link is my mother's brother, who was a founder of the NSA. So he was in the CIA, one of the founders of NSA when it was Arlington Hall, along with some other of his cousins, my relatives. And then he became the founder and creator of GCHQ with the Five Eyes, setting up the Five Eyes. So that's a very clear connection. My father's a little more difficult. He was obviously an operative, even when we were living on the San Diego border, he'd be out all night watching the border with binoculars. So I never totally understood, except that he was terrified of these people, and he would hand me off. He'd rather I went out and killed myself than he ever get exposed. So
it's a hard to say it's a hard topic is a gross understatement. But as I read your book, I'm almost through. Like I said, the book is you're such an incredible author, and your chapters are short, but they're powerful. And it's like you're just going through chapter, and then there's times where you're like, okay, I got to stop. I have to stop to gather my thoughts. Okay, what have I just read? And and I love how you write it because it's from a voice of you growing up. So it's your voice at 10 years old. And one of the saddest things that I read, it was in the very beginning of your book, and you were talking about the first time that this happened to you, and you were looking at your father like, you're my daddy. What's going on here? Where's Dad? You're supposed to be taking care of me. That has to be like forever and just burnt into your soul, I would think, as a child to go through.
Well, right
that.
after that, I tried to kill myself, jumping out of the car.
Yes.
I didn't want to live. I'd already had a similar experience with my mother, who I never, ever have been able to remember. Even though she lived to be 80, I just can't remember hardly anything about her. But yeah, I must be a very strong person. I never thought of myself particularly as a strong person. And
oh no, I see you as a pillar of strength. As I'm reading this, and I've already spoken to you about 2 different times prior to this interview, and that's what I keep coming back. How did this woman even survive? Like, how did she go from a government-sponsored destruction of children to going to college and being a doctor, and then doing the other million things that you've done successfully? You should have already been dead, ma'am. You should have strung out on drugs. You should have done a million harmful things to yourself. There's no way that you should be here, except obviously God had a very unique plan for you. But the atrocities, can you speak to, just so your audience, and my audience is not the type that's going to be squeamish, and
okay.
Brandon House, that Brandon that owns this platform, he's just like shoot people in right between the eyes, and I believe that's the only way. I believe niceties are over because our government is
too late for that. It's too late for that. And honestly, that's a large part of why I came out. I mean, the first time I spoke publicly about being in MKUltra and the satanic influences on my life and revealing about my family and all that was at a Red Pill Expo in November of 2021. So it's really only like 3 years ago. And I fully expected to be like jeered out of the room and ostracized. And because of my past conditioning, I mean, I thought they'd beat me up and shoot me. I mean, it was that. Right. But I was going to do it come hell or high water because it had to be done. I mean, people have to understand. And we've been going back and forth a bit because there is a relationship between the MKUltra conditioning. Thousands of children went through that program. And this was proven with congressional testimony and hearings in the 1970s that the church hearings, Senator Church held hearings and collected a volume of evidence on what was going on. And at that time, the CIA was funding like 150 different MKUltra programs with unknown numbers of children. And they admitted that the children were being sexually abused, physically abused, psychologically abused, terrorized, split into multiple identities. They admitted all of these things. And it's in the congressional record. And so now I forgot where I was going with this. Let me connect it for you because I would like you. Yeah, well, no, I like to connect this with, if you can tell us, even though it's hard and it's hard for our audience to hear, tell us what abuses you went through.
and
Well, one of the
and the
things
situations that you went through.
one of the things I describe in Sparky,
Hmm.
actually, Sparky took place when I was 10 years old. This was one of my favorite identities because I was just going into puberty. I knew that my future was nothing. Like I was going to be a whore. I mean, I was living in a neighborhood full of brothels. I mean, the next door to me, my next door neighbor had brothels with trafficked children. I heard them all night long, and I knew that my future was just terrible. And we were living on the border, the Mexican border in Imperial Beach, which is south of San Diego and as close to Tijuana as you can get. And our apartment in the Imperial Garden Apartments was right on the Tijuana sewer. So
Hmm.
the happy part of my childhood was being out in the sewer with my bicycle, riding over the settling paths on these little dirt dikes between the ponds. You know, if you fell in, you'd die. But I was free there. You know, it stank. It was filthy. I've had health problems ever since, I think, from having spent so much time breathing in the dust of that stuff. But when I was there, I was able to, like, I did it with smells. You know, it's very hard to remember trauma. And the way I do it is with smells. And you know San Diego. You know
Yes.
Imperial Beach.
I
It
do.
stinks. My
Yes.
God, does that place
It's
stink.
raw sewage, just raw
Yeah.
sewage from Mexico. Yep.
Yeah. And that stink wafts in, and then there's all kinds of other smells because there's
Yes.
industrial waste. There's fuel from the ships. There's
Mhm.
and at that time they were using the old destroyer escorts for target practice. So you'd smell the cordite. You know, the stuff would blow in. Anyway, it was full of smells. So I used that, and it got very difficult when I got to the Christmas vacation that we spent in Imperial Beach. And
Please talk about that. I read that this morning, and I just was like, that was one of those chapters I just had to, after I read it, I had to put down and just take a breather. Tell our audience about that Christmas when you got the early Christmas present from your mother.
oh yeah, yeah, and you got to know this is going on right now. They're getting ready to do a huge Saturnalia all across this country for Christmas. You know, Christmas is not when Christ was born; it's when Nimrod was born, and it's a satanic holiday. It's their holy day, and the balls and the lights and the that's all satanic. Has nothing to do with Christianity. But anyway, every Christmas I would be taken, and of course I forgot. Every year I'd erase and start over. So that Christmas was no different. We'd gotten my father had brought home a plastic Christmas tree that had to be assembled. So I remember the smell of that plastic. And then my mother gave me an early Christmas present, actually both my parents. It was this big pink box with a bow on it. And it was this pale, transparent peignoir set, they called it. So it was this beautiful nightgown and this filmy bathrobe.
And you were 10 years old. 10
years
to
old,
12, right? 10 years old.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I'm sorry. Continue.
And I thought it was absolutely beautiful. I mean, that's all I remembered anyway. And so I tried it on. They made me take a bath first. I hated taking baths. I never took baths if I could avoid it. And so they made me take a bath before I could put the peignoir on. So then I was sort of dancing around our apartment in the peignoir, and the guys from MKUltra showed up, and it was Vito and
Mm-hmm.
a couple of the guys. They always used Navy MPs. They used them for enforcement, and so everything in my experience focused around the Navy. So they came into our apartments. I saw them coming. I tried to get away from them. I tried to fight them. I knocked over the Christmas tree, banged into the coffee table, and then they shot me. They gave me shots, injected me with something that absolutely paralyzed me. I was aware of everything, but I couldn't move. And they took me out to a white van. Always use white vans. They're using them now. Threw me in the back like a log on top of other logs. And there were several children in the back, all terrified, all kind of whimpering and scared to death, and all wearing peignoir sets, just like mine. And they took us to, I don't know the real location, but they took us to a place where it was basically what we would consider like a Christmas office party, with decorations everywhere, boughs hanging everywhere. And the smells there were pine and cinnamon and burning logs. So like a nutmeggy, spicy smelling, burning log that also smelled like pine. And they had caretakers, they called nanny blacks. All the people that were programs had code names that were colors. So the top guy was Dr. Green, then there was Dr. White, then there was Dr. Brown, and then there were nanny blacks. And the nanny blacks wore like nun habits, except that they were men. And they're the ones that like physically took care of the children. And just an aside, if your audience wants to know what a Saturnalia looks like, the opening ceremonies of the 2012 Olympics, which were not shown inside the United States, you have to get the you have to get the actual DVD of the ceremonies and look at it. And the opening ceremonies is a Saturnalia with all of the characters, including the nanny blacks, and then devils, these black creatures that we call devil cats, that just terrorized the children and represented. There were white ones and black ones. They represented good and evil and anyway. But so I was carried in, unable to move, by one of the nanny blacks, and they put me on a bower of pine and gave me a name and a crown and then this thing got underway, and they always had fawns, being the half man, half goat, playing pipes, running around. And after a while, I survived a lot of my life by being able to dissociate. And my body would be in a place, but my mind isn't there, and my spirit is out of there, and I've gone somewhere else. So I'd already done that. Dissociated, since I couldn't move, and men started raping me. And the other little girls who'd been in the van with me, they let them come out of the anesthetic. They didn't let me come out, but they came out of the anesthetic. So they were running around screaming, and it wasn't long before they started killing them. So these children were all sacrificed. And they would cut out their hearts and smear me with their blood, which I remember very distinctly, the smell. And at that point, I was like floating on the ceiling, just desperate to get out and to go someplace else. And this thing went on and on and on. And it was the most, I wanted them to kill me too. Like, why did they almost force me to live when the other children died? It just was all wrong. And it really wasn't until like 2 years ago that I gave up the idea that I could have saved them, that I was guilty for their deaths because I couldn't save them. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was 10 years old. I was also being raped. But when I finally got back, and I don't remember a whole lot beyond that, I went off into my Sparky fantasy where I was a very powerful Scottish warrior named Sparky McGregor, and I fought, and I had a sword, and I was strong, and I could do magic, all the things I couldn't really do. I was doing in my in my dissociated state. And when I finally sort of came out of the drugs back in my parents' home, I had huge black eyes, which happened fairly often when I was in these ritualistic abuse things. I took a picture of it, and it's in the book. They'd faded a bit, but you can see the black around my eyes. My father thought it was just hysterically funny, which is why he took the picture. So he gave me something. He gave me some hot chocolate, and I still fell for it. I was so desperate for my father's approval, my father's love, my father's protection, that I drank what he gave me, and it was LSD, and I went on a horrendous trip, tore up my entire room, tore up a lot of the apartment, broke my window. I mean, it was... Then I had to go to school the next day. So anyway, so that's what my childhood consisted of. And I understood that my one way out was to be an exceptional student and I barely had shoes. A lot of time growing up, I didn't have shoes, and the school would give me shoes. And
why wouldn't you have shoes? Was that part of the breaking you down?
My parents didn't like to spend money on me, even though they were being paid. I know they were being paid because they were always complaining about it wasn't enough. The MKUltra program were paying them. I think they had some kind of, because my mother was the sister of the NSA founder, and the whole family was very high up in this process, which is why they got to keep me and get paid for me. So that wasn't true of other kids. So I had special. Can you explain?
You were special.
Yeah, special.
Ma'am, why? Can you tell our audience why? What was the government's big overarching plan with this?
It was clearly to make me a spy. It was clearly to program me to do dangerous things in the future. If I work at it hard enough, I can bring them up. When I was in my Sparky persona, they did a lot of deep hypnosis and remote viewing with Russia. And I didn't really realize that until I went to Russia, and suddenly these streets were familiar and I spoke some Russian, and so it was, my later life was filled with things that were actually memories, but were inexplainable. So a great deal of my life is spent trying to explain what I call Factor X, which is there's things that you don't know and that you can't understand because you're missing a big piece.
Right.
And when Kathy O'Brien's books came out, and she went forward and testified before Congress about her experience in MKUltra, and then she had to flee. That sparked something in me. For one thing, she survived the process. Another thing, she survived it, and she's a lovely, lovely person. She has sweetest, purest heart. And I didn't consider myself that way. I considered myself damaged goods, completely contaminated, dangerous person, because I could go between the personalities and forget.
Right.
That still kind of happens. But yeah, I had a long, long way to go, and I'm 75 and I'm not done yet. So where did the other thousands of kids come? They couldn't have been all from their families. Well, there were various categories. Special categories like me. We were sort of the aristocracy. We came from the long bloodline, royal lines. I have the same as Barack Obama and George Bush, the bloodlines that the royal house. Then And there were thousands of them put in there. The ones that managed to survive, that didn't suicide themselves at the age of 27, the 27 Club and the Freedom Train, when if you couldn't hack it, if you just, your psyche gave out, your spirit gave out, your body gave out, then you were expected to die at the age of 27. And but hundreds and hundreds survived that. But in order to survive in the program, and this is the big thing for me, you have to give up your soul. And the giving up of the soul is done in a ritual. There may be others, but this one I know. They would tie me to a big wheel with symbols on it, sometimes yin yang, sometimes other things, that would be laying flat on the wheel in a horizontal position, and they would start to turn the wheel, and it would be surrounded by men in robes. And I saw an exhibition once. I went to the first Masonic lodge, which is in Alexandria, and they had an exhibition of the ceremonial robes of what they called the jesters, and that put me back for weeks. It's just looking at those hideous robes, the bright colors and the symbols on them, and I didn't spend a lot of time, but I took pictures. Someday I'll go back and look at them if there's any reason to. But anyway, they spin you faster and faster while the jesters are chanting, "There is no light, there is no dark, there is no good, there is no evil. There is no day, there is no night, there is no man, there is no woman." On and on and on and on, going faster and faster and faster. And you just get more and more disoriented and confused. And then they start speaking in other languages. And then when you're just spinning to the point where you do anything to make it stop, then they say, "There's only green. Your soul is supposed to leave your body in a green flash." And from then on, then you are the singer with no talent that gets all the fame. You're the football player that can barely play. You're the Secretary of State who's not not as smart as your dog catcher. These people got promoted and moved up into our government and into corporations, and these are people that gave up their soul. So we wonder why we have all this leadership at the corporate government fascist level, being the top of major corporations, the huge government contractors, the Beltway bandits, the military and industrial complex, all these people who seem to have absolutely no regard for the rest of humanity, which they don't. But they are the ones that get outrageous salaries, huge benefits, fame, glory, the bling, the best of the food, and they get away with murder. They don't have to pay for their crimes. You see them every day, and they are ruining our country. And I am positive that these are the MKUltra survivors who gave up their soul, as opposed to the ones, and I know many who didn't give up their soul and are also successful. But so if you survived, and then you get the mansions, the bling, you become a P. Diddy or a Jeffrey Epstein, or you're used by the controllers to control other people.
So, ma'am, doctor, we've been talking for almost 40 minutes. It feels like I've been talking for 4 seconds. Yes, for 4 seconds. For 4 seconds. If I didn't have a constraint, I would just let you continue. What I would like to ask, and you don't have to answer now, but I would love to have you come back as a regular and just walk through this, because you can't do it in an hour. You can't do it in 3 hours. Look, you have a great article going to be released shortly. I have 10, 15 questions because I thought I read it on the plane going to my testimony, and I read it coming back again just to go through it. Number one, you're an incredible writer. Number two, everything you're writing is true. I know it is true. I've already seen it happen. I witnessed it in my law enforcement. I witnessed it in writing a book. I witnessed it in doing documentaries about child sex trafficking. It's all interconnected, isn't it?
Yes,
It's all
it is.
interconnected. We're living in it today, and maybe that's why it's affecting me, because I don't feel like you got thrown into it. I'm not equating what I've gone through. I'm just saying I feel like I've been thrust in this. Like I didn't go into to do a documentary about child sex trafficking. I find myself in this world, and it is maddening. I will tell you, it is maddening, because I have 30 seconds. Gosh, I could stay 3 more hours. It feels, ma'am, as if I am going into some dark, crazy land that is so absurd that even I'm like, well, JJ, this can't be happening. This is absurd. But it's not absurd. It's the truth. So I thank you. I have 10 seconds. I thank you. I hope you think about it. I'd love to call you after and just say, can we set up maybe once a week, whatever, once every 2 weeks, whatever it is that you need to tell their story, because I think it's fascinating, but it's real in today. So, ma'am, doctor, thank you for your time. I can't thank you enough, and I can't wait to speak to you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for all you've been doing.
Thank you, ma'am. God.